Hi everyone, my name is Aled Davis, founder of MediatorAcademy.com, home of the passionate mediator. This is the place where mediators, aspiring, new and accomplished, come and listen to experienced mediators, experienced practitioners and thought leaders from around the world. The people we interview are incredibly generous with their time, sharing their knowledge and experience with you so that you can learn, grow and improve your effectiveness. Hopefully you'll be inspired by what you hear and go out into the world, build your own success story, make a difference, leave a legacy, do what you need to do, and maybe then you'll come back onto Mediator Academy, tell your story to my audience. All right, I think we'd all agree that there are different approaches to the practice of mediation. Some sit comfortably with us, others less comfortably. Why does it matter which approach we use? And how do we figure out whether we're acting consistent with the values of mediation or not? In fact, what are the values of mediation? Many would consider my guest today as one of the leaders in the field of mediation. He's a professor of communication at Temple University in Philadelphia. He's got a PhD in communication from the University of Wisconsin and served on the faculty of the University of Michigan prior to his appointment at Temple. He conducts research and teaches in the area of conflict management, mediation, group process and decision making. He's worked extensively as a third-party intervenor and mediator in organisational, community and family disputes. He's been the programme chair for the National Conference on Peacemaking and Conflict Resolution and has helped to establish several major conflict intervention programmes. He's also published extensively in the area of communication, conflict and mediation, and most notably his book, The Promise of Mediation, Responding to Conflict Through Empowerment and Recognition with Robert Bush, has inspired many mediators, including myself, to develop their thinking and their practice. And I feel very privileged to have this opportunity to welcome Joseph Folger onto Mediator Academy. Joe, a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Aletta. It's great to talk with you.
The Promise of Mediation is probably was a bit of an awakening for me. I was reading it. I just happened to read it at a time when I was really thinking and reflecting on the kinds of things that were informing the way I practiced as a mediator. And I say that because I think I espoused all the things that I was taught as a mediator, but I would find myself in a mediation doing and saying things that I felt deeply uncomfortable with. Thinking, hold on a second, should I be saying this? And just going along with it. And it reached a point where I thought, hold on a second, I don't think I've really thought long and hard about what's going on in my mind, in my head, in my heart, about the way I'm practicing as a mediator. When I read your, even the opening chapter of your book, you talked about the four different stories of the mediation process that illustrate the distinct practices that exist today. When I read those, I thought I could see, now I'm getting some clarity. Joe, tell me a little bit about the thinking behind those stories and more.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you started, with this question or this topic because, I think what we were trying to do from the very first edition of The Promise of Mediation was to delve into the underlying premises. We would use different terms, ideologies, assumptions, premises, but we realized that those had not been examined by the mediation field when we were writing the first edition, which was in the 1990s. And, I had been working in the mediation field, so had Baruch Bush, since the 1970s. And we were watching the evolution of the mediation movement in the U.S. And we were doing training ourselves, we were doing practice, and it was all about technique. It was all about methods. It was all about, ground rules and what you did formulaically in the room. And so we saw problems with what was happening to practice. We were becoming concerned that mediation was becoming more and more like the processes it was supposed to replace or be a substitute or an alternative to. Mm-hmm. And so we were wondering, why is this happening? It's not just bad practice. It's not, it's not people trying to do the wrong thing. And we really dug deep into, well, what's behind this movement? What's behind this process? What are people thinking they're trying to achieve? And so we did start by sorting out the different objectives that we saw people having in the field for mediation. And there were always several different objectives or concerns, about mediation. You mentioned, the stories. I won't go through them all, but the idea is that, the prevalent story was the satisfaction story. And that's because the courts were very interested in the development of mediation for the purposes of reducing court backlog.
Okay.
Historically, that was a big impetus. So the idea of satisfaction was being economical, saving money and court time, and letting people come to, individualistic realizations of what they wanted and settling things in a compromising way.
So the primary goal of the satisfaction story is really settlement, reaching a settlement.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Because if you didn't reach settlement, the cases would not leave the court. They would go back to the court. The parties would be dissatisfied because they expected a settlement, et cetera, et cetera. That had a huge impact on the way practice was done, and we've articulated that. Mm-hmm. But deeper than that is, where is this coming from? Where did this model of settlement-driven practice come from? And how did it tie to the ideology of the courts, which is very individualistically based, rights-based? The Harvard negotiation model is a legal economic model, which many of the mediation processes were built on. Mm-hmm. In the satisfaction story, there was no theory of mediation. There was a theory of conflict with implications for what you do then if you accept that theory of conflict.
Yeah.
And we were trying to point that out, that you have to go deeper than method, basically, or technique.
Yeah.
And so I think we were, and it's glad to hear that the book helped you think through, why am I doing what I'm doing, and what should I be doing if I want to accomplish something else?
Yeah.
One of our mantras is the idea that purpose drives practice. We say that in our trainings. We say it constantly.
Purpose drives practice. Say a bit more about that.
Yeah, purpose meaning, what are you trying to accomplish? Every mediator wants to make conflict more productive, but what does that mean? What does your purpose reside? Where does it reside? What are you trying to do? And then once you are clear on that purpose and you've articulated it, the practice is followed from that. And then you are on firmer ground in terms of deciding, do I want to do this or do I not want to do this?
Yeah.
As opposed to saying, I'm doing this, why am I doing it, as you pointed out. So what we tried to do was to articulate a relational set of premises, an ideological orientation that wasn't ours. We didn't create it, but there were theorists in moral development and political science, sociology, mm-hmm. that were talking about a relational as opposed to an individualistic ideology.
Okay.
And we were drawing out the implications for thinking about how we intervene as mediators and conflict intervention specialists if, in fact, we view the world not as based on self-interest and rights and needs, but upon the fact that human beings have the capability for both strength of self and connection with others, that it's as much a part of our human nature to want to be connected to others and to understand them and to figure out what they're about so we can decide what we want to do, at the same time that we're committed also to being true to ourselves.
Right.
And that the struggle in conflict is that challenge of balancing those two very human urges and tendencies is brought to the front and center. And we saw that mediators can help people figure out how they achieve that balance of strength of self in connection with others. That's really what a very valuable purpose of mediation is.
Okay, so it's a bit like having a compass setting, having a course set so that you can trim your sail accordingly to reach that destination, understanding where you're heading so that you can make the necessary interventions that are consistent with that direction that you're heading.
Yeah, and it sounds a little simple when you put it that way, but actually it requires some deep self-reflection and introspection.
Yeah.
About who we are as people that want to intervene in other people's conflict.
Yes.
And what we're trying to do. And it creates some discomfort sometimes when we really say, what are our goals? What do we think people are capable of, for example? So one major distinction, that we make is the importance of party self-determination. Mm. And we are very committed to that in the transformative model. And that requires some soul searching in terms of any of us who are doing this work. Do we really believe that people know what it takes, that they have their own best answers, that they will make their own best choices? And if we do not believe that, it's very hard to be committed to this way of practicing, for example.
So the kind of thinking, the kind of reflection that you're talking about, I mean, I agree. I think it requires, if we think contemplating a career in mediation, I often encounter people that say to me, Aled, look, I'm thinking of a career change in mediation. I worked in sales, so I'm quite good at negotiation. I think that would do me well. Or I worked in banking. I've got some good knowledge in banking, and the focus seems quite superficial. It seems people make some assumptions about the skills that they have, or they have. They make assumptions about what mediation is, first of all, and then what would be most useful for other people, rather than thinking, what are my beliefs about conflict? What are my beliefs about human nature, interaction, and so on?
Yeah, that's the deeper question. And through the years doing training, I'm thinking actually of some training I did in London many years ago at the Greenwich Mediation Center, and there were volunteers who came to want to be mediators in the program, and they were basically solicited from the community, no particular backgrounds necessary. But there was one young man who came into the training in Greenwich, and he was great. He was a manager in an organization, very bright, very energetic, friendly guy, and he couldn't wait to do the training. And as we got into the training, I could see him kind of withering and becoming concerned. And he realized that this was going to take skills he didn't have. He was used to solving problems for people, doing it for them, coming up with solutions and answers. He was the go-to guy, and he was good at it. But this model requires you to stand someplace else. And he really had to soul search to say, who am I if I'm doing this work, as opposed to settling problems or getting agreements for people that I think will work for them. It was a huge transformation for him. And that's where this kind of conversation about what are the deeper premises leads you.
Yes. I've got to say, I feel like in the UK we are light years away from asking ourselves those kinds of questions in terms of embarking on mediation training. And it deeply concerns me. It really does concern me that, I know a number of organisations that are training mediators, and it is a stack 'em high, sell 'em cheap business. Let's get them through the door. And I don't know. It's as if it should be incumbent upon every individual to be asking these sorts of questions going into the field. But how, as a field, do we help people think in this way? Do we help people get to a point where they go, hold on a second, this is not about me setting some ground rules and doing some active listening, nodding and humming. This is really about rigorously reflecting on the values that I'm as you said, who am I when I'm in this conversation?
Well, see, I think there's a lot of answers to that question. I mean, in some ways, because first of all, I think that there was one model of mediation that was so prevalent, which was related to the satisfaction story, and people just assumed that that was the only way you could practice.
Yeah.
And so I think what we tried to do was pull back a little and say, well, that's a choice. That's one way, but here's another way, right?
Yeah.
And when you put up the contrast, it can be difficult for people because it seems like you're challenging the other model, when in fact we're saying, well, there's an alternative here. And then we're explaining why we wanted to go in the direction of this alternative. If you have a choice, you have to make a decision what you want to do. But when you have those choices and you know about those choices, it requires you to dig deeper, I think. Because then you're saying, why would I choose working this way versus this way? And then the questions start coming up. So I think, if in England there isn't that discussion, it's maybe because there hasn't been enough discussion of the options and what the options mean and how is transformative different from problem-solving mediation, and what are the premises that make them different, and therefore we have to search deeper for that.
Yeah,
I think that's important for any professional. And the other thing is the field is still struggling in terms of, is it a profession? Does it have certain requirements? What are the requirements to become an effective mediator?
yeah.
That debate has gone on in the United States for 30 years. And, is it just taking 40 hours of a training? Is it getting a master's degree in conflict resolution? It's all over the place,
Yeah.
in terms of what people experience on their way to becoming a mediator.
Yeah. I mean, just if you think, if you're thinking now about the various governing bodies that, protect or oversee the practice of mediation, and the various codes of conduct, they all talk about impartiality and neutrality. Now, we could have a week-long debate about the notion of neutrality and impartiality. Is it an attainable ideal or not? Do we really think enough about what we're saying when we're sitting down with parties to say, I'm a neutral, I'm independent, I'm impartial? And what, and do parties really understand what that means? Do they know what that means?
Right.
Is it important to them?
My feeling is that the whole issue of neutrality or impartiality is the flip side of examining what is empowerment of the parties, what is allowing the parties to have self-determination. And I think unless people really look at that issue and say to themselves, do I really believe that people can make the best decisions for themselves when I mediate? And if I don't, then what am I doing, right? When does that encourage me to step away from partiality and neutrality? Yeah. That's really what has to be examined, not the issue of, be neutral. That's too easy. The question is, what do I believe people are capable of? I often say in recent years at trainings and in other places that the litmus test for a transformative mediator is that when you're mediating, you may feel that a party is going to make a decision that they regret later. And you have to be comfortable with the fact that you may believe that a party was going to make a decision on that day in the mediation that they will regret later. Because we don't know for sure whether they will regret it. And even if they do, they might learn from it. And we all make decisions we want to change in our lives. But when you think about it that way, can a mediator stand back that far when they believe that, is sort of what I mean by a commitment to party self-determination.
That's a great reflective question, isn't it? In the moment, to be able to kind of just be a curious observer of yourself in that.
Yeah.
In that.
I once gave a talk about transformative mediation many years ago, and I was explaining some of these values and the commitments, and there was a woman in the audience who was listening very attentively, and she was very polite, and she raised her hand towards the end of the session, and she said, I hear what you're saying, and I understand the importance of practicing the way you say you would want mediators to practice. But she said, I've been a judge for 15 years. And she said, and I believe that if you don't tell people what to do, nothing changes. And, I was so glad we had the conversation and that she brought that up, because she was really thinking through for herself, does she believe people have the human capability to make choices, to make decisions, to create new options for themselves and move forward? She just realizes she does not believe that.
Yeah.
That's the kind of self-reflection you have to have before you step into the room if you really want to be committed to the core value of party empowerment, party self-determination, neutrality in a mediation.
Yeah. Now, there's a lovely title in your book, Waking Up to What is Being Lost. What's one of the headings in your book, and I think one of the things that you refer to is the erosion or the dilution of self-determination, and we're talking about self-determination now. For me, that's a real important value. People, make a free and informed choice about what they want to do next, and then and it's consistent with empowerment. It's got it's consistent with empowerment. But help me understand why you think. Let's say the the settlement orientated model of mediation potentially erodes party self-determination?
Well, we weren't, and I in particular wasn't trying to just make a case against another model. We didn't want to build a new model. We were just concerned about the evolution of practice. And actually, it was research on what went on in the room in mediation that pretty much convinced me that 2/3 of mediators who work within that model, at least, are pretty directive and pretty, lose that orientation to party self. I did some of this research myself. Other people did it. When you actually looked at the process. Up until the early 1990s, there was very little research done on what went on in the mediation room. It was all about inputs, outputs. Did they reach agreement? Did they not? Because that's what the courts were interested in. But then communication scholars and other people got very interested in what happens in the room. That research convinced me that, this was going on. And that was of concern, right? And I want to say, Aled, that I don't think mediators ever want to be directive or be in control for the sake of controlling people's lives. What I came to realize is it's a protective instinct that many mediators have. The idea that mediators want to protect people from bad choices again, or from solutions that are not going to work. If you tell yourself as a mediator, I'm there to solve people's problems, then the line between solving them and feeling like you've got to solve them well is a very, very thin line. And that's where I think the research shows the way mediators selectively facilitate. There were some researchers in England who looked at the way mediators worked, and they said they identified a process called selective facilitation, where mediators were dropping issues off the table that they thought didn't fit good solutions.
I feel like cowering now.
No, not at all. But they were great researchers. But what I'm saying is that, it wasn't just in my head or that I thought we need a new model. It was the reality of what I saw happening and what the research was demonstrating in terms of the practice. And it was coming from the underlying assumptions that people can't make good choices for themselves, that a solution that we think isn't going to work is one we've got to protect the parties from. I mean, it does go to that level.
And I had an experience recently last year. I think it was after the interview I did with Dan Simon on certain interventions consistent with the transformative approach, and he gave me a phrase. I think it was something like, "And which direction would you like the conversation to go next?" And I remember being in a mediation. It was a mediation I had very soon after that, and I found myself in the conversation having a bit of a moment that you described, where you're about to say something, and you have it's almost as if you have an out-of-body experience where you're observing yourself before you say something. I was observing my thinking, I was about to say, I think we need to move on to the next issue. I was about to say that, right?
Yeah.
And the whole thing was slowed down for me, and instead I remember Dan's phrase. So I said, and instead I said, "In which direction do you want the conversation to go next?" And there was a long pause, and one party said, "Well, I'd like to continue talking about this, but then I want to talk about this." And I went, "Okay." And it was a real. And I reflected on that, and I think it was rooted in my need to be, it's almost as if I needed to justify my existence in the room. I have to be useful in some way. I can't just sit there and listen,
Well, that's the question, right? I mean, I often get the perception before people really have done the training in transformative mediation that the mediator doesn't do anything. What's their value? What's their utility? It's just so not true. If you really take the training, the difficulty of mastering the skills is enormous. And some people find it much more difficult to learn the skills of transformative mediation than they do other models if they've learned both. Even though, because it takes incredible concentration to stay in the moment and to stop yourself from taking that kind of control that you could have taken at that point. But when you ask that question, parties that are invited to make choice, to think through what's important to them, to decide, where they do want to go, how they want to use their time. And by asking that question, you've given them an incredible gift of empowerment. And that's where they get the courage then to make decisions about many other things that they thought they couldn't have a conversation about. So your utility is enormous, but it's a different type of utility. It's a utility people are not used to tell you the truth. And that's why they find it so valuable. It's amazing how after I train people, the one thing I hear very frequently that I'm very proud of is that people feel that they are deeply respected when they are in a transformative mediation. And they will say that to me. I felt like you respected both of us. And what they're really saying is, you trusted us. You trusted that we could do this, and we stepped up to the plate and we did it.
Yeah.
And that's when we talk about, what's the ultimate value of mediation? It's that capacity building in people that they can get through and have a very difficult conversation about difficult issues and come out on the other end, maybe with not a perfect solution, maybe with no solution, but they've learned something about themselves and the other and what they want to do, what they don't want to do, why they want to go to court or why they don't want to go to court, why they can't continue the relationship with someone at work and understand it in a way that they didn't before they had that conversation. That's a huge capacity building function. In the Postal Service program we had, Cindy Halverland, the woman who ran that program, called it the upstream effects of mediation.
Okay.
She wanted that. That's why she chose the transformative model.
Yeah.
The idea that people can leave a mediation and feel as if they have greater capacity to deal with conflict, not with the person necessarily that they were in mediation with even, but with other people. And, that's huge. That's an incredible, useful role for a mediator.
Yes. And I guess that's where that for me challenges one of the misconceptions I think that exists around transformative mediation. When I struggle sometimes to describe transformative mediation in a way that's useful, helpful. I think, but when I do, I often get the response that says, I don't think that's going to be suitable for this kind of mediation because they're not interested in maintaining an ongoing working relationship. They just need to agree a figure.
Yeah, that's a huge myth, and we've written about this several times. I'm writing a paper now where I'm re-emphasizing it. It's just one of those difficulties of clarification that because we use the word relational approach to mediation, people assume it's a relationship approach, and there's a huge difference. I have written an article on that where I compare the harmony model of mediation with the transformative model.
Okay.
The harmony model is a relationship-oriented approach where the purpose is to try to make sure that people restore their relationship.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that approach. It's used many times in religious contexts, religious communities, church institutions, some family interventions. But you have to be clear that that's your goal. The transformative model is not a relationship model. It's a relational model, which means that people are interacting with each other for however long they're in conflict. And can they relate to each other in a relational way, meaning balance the strength of self and understanding and connection with the other in a way that makes them more aware of the choices they want to make. And the choice could be to end a relationship. The choice could be to continue a relationship. The choice could be to change the relationship. You can end a relationship relationally, or you can end a relationship with a lot of hatred, anger, misunderstanding, misperception, antagonism, and the consequences of one or the other, whether it's a work relationship, marriage, or whatever it may be. So we're not in any way insisting that, when we practice transformative mediation, that it's about the goal of restoring the relationship. You could have a conflict with an insurance company, and you're the client or the person, and and the conversation could be relational or it could not be relational. Yeah. But you may never see that person again. Well, when we're working with people, we're working with their conflict interaction, and the quality of that interaction is what we're trying to support.
So when you earlier on the start of the interview, you talked about purpose to everything that you do. You had a phrase, and it sounds like as well that we need to be really explicit. Part of describing or defining our approach is about being really explicit about the goal of our particular approach.
I think that's right. I think that's important. I don't think that it means comparing and contrasting a lot of different approaches, but it does mean being honest with clients and with your programs with what you're doing. And you can speak about the goals of transformative mediation in everyday language, as I'm sure Dan talked about in his interview, that we're not talking about empowerment recognition when we talk to clients. We are talking about the fact that here's a chance for the two of you to have a conversation, hopefully in a way that you've not been able to have it before. The decisions will be yours to make. My role is to help facilitate that conversation so you have greater understanding of yourself and the other person, and can make decisions that are best for yourself. Now, there's a very thumbnail off the top of my head description that I would say to someone if they said, what do you do as a mediator? And what we are about? Yeah. I would start with a statement something like that. Yeah. And if they want to know more, I would answer those questions.
Yeah, and we've probably got about 1,000 people pausing this interview now, writing that down, Joe.
Well, that would be great. I hope that happens. But, it's that once you understand your purpose, putting it in your own words is relatively easy. I mean, that's one of the exercises I do in the basic training. After we've talked about the purpose, I ask people then to describe it to someone, or to stakeholders who might want to use mediation, so you can put it into your own words. Because if you can't, then you really don't understand the purpose.
Yes. Yes, that's it, isn't it? Being able to articulate it, not, if I'm thinking about, honestly, I do some of these interviews, Joe, and I cringe because it requires me to look back at some of the things that I used to do and teach, and I'm just.
Well, we've all been there. I was there, right? But it was my own discomfort with what I was doing that made me realize something's off here.
Yeah.
To give you an example, some of the standard ways of practice that I used to use and I taught, before Baruch Bush and I met and started saying, what are we doing here? I remember asking both parties to sit quietly. One person would speak first, the other person would take notes, and then the other person would speak, the other person would take notes, and they would both end up talking to me, the mediator, as they told their stories. Mm-hmm. And when both parties stopped, they would be looking at me like, now you understand it, mediator, what are you going to do about this? And it was very uncomfortable. It was very unsettling. It was like, no, this is your decision making. But it felt like something I was doing in the way I was setting up the process was creating an expectation that was against the very goals that I was after as a mediator.
Yes.
It was that sort of thinking that, you had to go through to say, where is this coming from? Why am I doing that? If my goal is to support the transformation of their conflict communication or their interaction in the session, because they're talking to me.
So I think you've hit something here. This is the problem that I think for a lot of the mediation trainings now in the UK are facilitative, espoused facilitative mediation. So yes. you learn the particular process, but you don't learn why you're doing that. But of course, by embedded within that, sort of narrative that you kick the mediation off, embedded in there are some assumptions and beliefs about your role, about the party's role, about the purpose of the mediation, without being explicit. So, if I'm opening by saying I'm your mediator today, I'm independent, impartial. I'm going to start off by making some ground rules clear, so don't interrupt. All embedded are so many assumptions in there.
Yes, huge. And
I'm not.
And when you ask people to examine what they're doing and saying, if you show them the link between the assumption and the practice, it gets them thinking. It's like, is that really what I believe? Like reframing people's comments. Why are you reframing their comments? What is your goal in doing that? Yeah. What message are you sending when you decide to reframe something? Is it implying that you know the way they should speak, or you know what they should be saying instead of what they're saying? And is that what you really want to be doing? It takes that kind of questioning, but if you question it and you're not comfortable with it, you still have to go somewhere else.
Yeah.
You still have to say, then what am I doing instead? And that's what I hope we provided an answer to with the transformative model, because we always start with the premises. We always start with the view of conflict and the view of human nature and human capability and all of that, and let people really wrestle with that before we ever get into technique or method.
Yes. Okay. Well, I want to touch on a bit of technique and method, because I was struck by an expression.
Can I interrupt 1 second? Before we do, let me just say something. What I think is important to preserve in mediation, okay, and maybe this could be independent of the models we've been talking about. I think it's important. What's the core of mediation that makes it unique and valuable? If I was going to answer that question, I would say two things. One is party self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
That mediation is different than other forms of conflict intervention, which are useful, helpful, like adjudication, arbitration, because of the strong commitment that mediation could have to the party empowerment. The transformative model takes that very, very seriously, and it's a point of contention for many people when we show them how seriously we take that.
Yeah.
The other characteristic is that is as important in defining mediation as a unique conflict resolution experience is that it is focused on the parties' conflict interaction. Okay? That the parties have the ability to interact with each other and to work through their conflict interaction. If you think about it, in arbitration, most of the time, in adjudication, people do not get to speak to each other. They don't get to interact. Everything is controlled by ground rules, court systems, all of that. Mediation is about the parties' interaction and supporting that. So the combination of empowerment of the parties and support for the parties' conflict interaction between them is what makes mediation unique. It's what makes it valuable, makes it different. If we lose those two characteristics, either one of them, people do not see it as different than other processes. And that's why mediation does not succeed, because the public is not stupid. And if they go to mediation and felt as if the mediator knew what had to happen, they were going to say, why didn't I just go to court? Why didn't I just go to arbitration? And I know people who've gone through mediation who've said it. So whether we strip away the title transformative, said problem solving, what I would look for in a mediator's practice, if I just watched videos of mediators and I didn't know what background they had, I would be looking to see, are they preserving the self-determination of the parties or are they undermining it? And secondly, are they supporting the ability of the parties to have the conflict interaction? That's an important thing, I think, to leave front and center.
So that's when you're setting sail and you're setting your course, your compass is pointing towards to what extent am I preserving self-determination, the party's self-determination in everything I do and say.
Including process and content.
And secondly, to what extent am I supporting their interaction, their conflict interaction?
Yes, exactly.
And
rather than controlling it, shutting it down, things you might do instead.
And that's the mirror I should be holding up to myself.
Yes.
As I'm mediating, as I'm thinking,
That, I would say yes. If you agree with me, Aled, and if others agree, that's what makes mediation unique. If someone makes a case that, no, mediation is unique because of this, I would love to hear it and think about it.
Yeah.
But when I really have thought about this and see mediation and think about it with respect to other methods, which are appropriate, valuable, could be useful, that hearing panels, whatever we want to come up with. Why is mediation unique? I think that question is so important because otherwise mediation does not grow.
Yeah.
It does not receive support from the public. It's not valued because it's not seen as unique.
Yeah. I mean, if I'm thinking about martial arts, for example, just take karate for it. You have, 3 or 4 different strands of karate, and then you have, within those different hybrid versions, but they don't call themselves karate. They would identify themselves as Shotokan karate or Kyokushinkai karate or you kung fu or judo or aikido, and each one has their own sort of ideology, their own theory, purpose. One is using the energy of the attacker, so not to injure the attacker, but just to. The other is to be combative in your approach, and you make an informed choice based on the goal of the art that you choose. Why is mediation so different? Why is it so different? I don't have a problem with. I did have a problem with evaluative mediation. I had a big problem with it. I don't have a problem with it as long as people are transparent about that's what they do, and they're really clear about the thinking that informs why they do what they do. And they're transparent about that, so that the parties themselves can go, I know a bit more about what you do now and the kind of interventions you make. That's for me. That's the kind of mediator I want. So people can make an informed choice. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with it to some extent, because I think it's important to be transparent about what you're doing, and if people want it, yes. It hurts, I think, the perception of mediation when we say we do evaluative mediation, because then it's not about party self-determination, and there's other methods where people evaluate cases, evaluate conflicts, evaluate issues, and come up with settlements, like non-binding arbitration. So give me the difference then between non-binding arbitration and evaluative mediation in a very clear terms, and I might be able to see it. But the danger is that then people get confused. There's a lot of confusion out there about what mediation is, because people do things that are very much like other methods of conflict intervention. That causes chaos in the perceptual field.
And that's the real dilemma, because by and large, most users are not informed users. They don't. If I think of whenever I get a call, whenever I get a call for a mediation, and most of the mediations I do, Joe, are workplace conflict. It's either HR that would contact me or the manager, and 99.9% of the time their understanding of mediation is way off.
No, we have a lot of work to do in the mediation field to, clarify and to demonstrate the value and the possibilities for mediation. But I worry when mediation is practiced so differently and done in a way that doesn't distinguish it from other methods, that then the public doesn't want it. I know of people who've gone through commercial mediations, for example. One guy I'm thinking of in particular, who was in a business dispute and went to mediation, not a mediator I knew, and he told me afterwards he would never go back. And I said, why? He said, because there were some things I wanted to say to the other side, which the mediator thought was irrelevant or destructive. And he basically came up with a compromising solution on the money, and we could have done that ourselves. He said, we didn't need a mediator, but I wanted to talk about things that he did not let me talk about. And so I won't go back. I'll go to court, or I'll go to an arbitrator or something else. He didn't see the point. I remember that case because I think about, there wasn't in that instance either self-determination about what he wanted to do in the mediation, and secondly, there wasn't support for having conversation between the parties that may have been difficult to be with, could have escalated the interaction for a while, etc. Some of the hallmarks that we teach in the transformative model are something the mediator has to be comfortable with. Otherwise, you're shutting down the parties' ability to speak to each other and say what they need to say to each other, which of course is very controlled in other forms of conflict intervention.
Yes. So if I really believe that at the heart of what I do is preserving party self-determination and supporting conflict interaction, I really need to understand what they mean, so that I can hold that mirror up and I can say to myself, is this intervention consistent with these?
Right. Well, and you just gave an example 7 minutes ago, I think, of holding that mirror up to yourself when you were about to intervene and say, let's go here next. And you said to myself, well, why am I saying that? Why can't I ask them where they want to go next in their conversation? You just gave more commitment to the party self-determination about the way they want their conversation to go by stopping yourself and thinking, why wouldn't I ask that?
And you know what? That's probably one of the most effective mediations, and I'm judging that not by the not necessarily by the outcome, but just by the quality of the conversation that took place between the parties. If I'm reflecting on all the mediations I've done, that one stands out as, wow, I just didn't expect that kind of conversation to take place.
Yeah, it's great to hear. It's great to hear. And I get that response many times after I've trained people. That even when they start doing their opening differently and they turn to the parties and ask them, you're going to be having a conversation. Is there anything you want to talk about now about how you want to have the conversation before we get started? because you can control the way this conversation can go, and you can bring it up at any point during the mediation session if you're troubled by the way the conversation is going. Just doing that will change the feel alone that the parties have about the way they will participate during the whole session. And I hear that very, very frequently.
Yeah, if you'd have asked me sort of 6 months ago what kind of mediator do I espouse to be, I was like, facilitative, I don't know now. I really don't know,
That's great to hear.
I'm lost. Hopefully none of my clients are watching this now.
No, listen, a professional should grow, right? A professional should think about what they're doing and how to be better and to try things. And, otherwise you get stale and you don't grow as a professional.
Yeah, but I'm enjoying this learning process. I'm enjoying developing my thinking. I'm enjoying really doing something different and getting a different response and getting a different experience and understanding why I'm doing it, and why it's.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so I'm mindful of time's getting on, Joe, and I'm really appreciative. Just a couple of things, interventions.
Okay.
I love the expression "following the heat." Could you say a bit more about that? I know
we talk about that in the training. Maybe Dan mentioned it or something, but the whole idea is that we try as transformative mediators not to be afraid of the intensity of difference, the expression of strong emotion, whatever that emotion may be, and that we don't shy away. We don't try to mutualize, is the phrase that's often used in other models of mediation, to bring people or to point to only the similarities. We're as willing to highlight and reflect and hold up how far apart people are and how intensely they disagree, as much as we are to say, wow, you really understand things differently now and you're agreeing that you want to do X, Y, and Z. There is a tendency for many mediators to avoid that because they think that negative conflict interaction is not going to be productive. And I can give you example after many famous mediators who have done training videos who, when the parties start talking intensely to each other and say things that are tough to hear, the mediators will literally back their chairs up and say, well, you can fight if you want to, but you're wasting your money or you're wasting our time. They will look at a conflict segment of interaction as being totally unproductive. That is not the assumption in the transformative model. The assumption is you have to support parties there. You have to be with that intensity because that's what they feel they need to express at that point and use the skills to help them hear what they're saying.
Yeah. I mean, John, just listening to you talk now, and I'm thinking, gosh, all the things that I've taught, when you're itemizing issues for discussion, you must never, attribute these issues to each individual.
Yeah.
Or you mustn't put numbers against them. God forbid, put numbers against them.
You were taught that, you're saying. Yeah. You were taught to do that, yeah.
I was taught to do
see, this is where, there are many people who say, sometimes interestingly, the transformative model is not really that different. I'm invested in empowerment and recognition, and as the transformative mediators are. It's not until they take the training. It's not until they really think about how different the practices are. Or it's what you do and it's what you don't do.
Yeah.
That really matter. That then people say, "Wow, this is different," and then they begin to realize why you can't do both.
Yeah.
That's another misunderstanding that many people have. People think that we're just idealistic and saying you choose one or the other. Physically, mentally, as a mediator, it's impossible to do two different things at the same time. And when you take the training and you see what it's like, you realize I couldn't possibly do those other things and be consistent with what I'm trying to do here, or even cognitively being able to, separate things and at the same time stay with where the parties are, or get ahead of the parties and then stay with the parties at the same time. It's just a physical impossibility.
Yes.
And that's why the choice has to be made.
Yes. And another marking points of disagreement. You mustn't highlight disagreement. You must, amplify alignment and try and brush any disagreements under the carpet. But now you're advocating it's important to mark these disagreements, points of disagreement.
Yeah, the parties should see how far apart they are. When they're far apart, they're going to have to make decisions about that. They may not ever come closer in the discussion, but they realize why they're not and why they have to make another choice. So people may leave a mediation and say, I have to leave this company. This has happened to me.
Yeah.
But now I know, mediator, why I have to do it.
Yeah.
I get it now. I'm not just angry. I'm not just reacting. I'm deliberately making a choice based upon greater understanding of the differences between us. And you helped us see where those differences are. You did not shut it down. You did not control it. You let me understand why I am where I am.
Yes.
That's
it's so energizing. I find it's so energizing, the whole notion of empowerment and experiencing that in a mediation. Okay, Joe, just lastly, finally.
Okay.
All right, so I'm bought in, okay? I'm sold. How do I and the thousands of other people that are going to watch this interview have a mediation revolution?
Well, I don't know if there's a mediation revolution. I think it's a personal revolution or a personal evolution.
Okay.
That mediators, can go through if they want to explore this. I mean, I love it when people come into a transformative mediation basic training. They've trained another model, and I just ask them to just, go with it, try it out, see where it fits, where it doesn't fit for them. And I can guarantee it will be a learning experience, whether or not someone ends up practicing that way or not, because you get a perspective on the way you do practice because you're stepping outside, right? So, you don't know what Mozart sounds like until you've heard Beethoven. And so that's the experience that, people get, I think. And so I love, the fact that we have a group of excellent trainers that can train this model, and that it's a growing experience wherever people end up after they've been through the training.
Yeah. Joe, look, you've been incredibly generous with your time. I really appreciate it. If people want to find more about you, by the way, this is a great book, and I'm not just I've got no vested interest in that. It was a real life-changing.
Well, I'm part of a larger institute, and the institute is transformativemediation.org, all one word, transformativemediation, one word.org. Okay. You can get information there. You can contact us through the institute. I do training in Europe frequently. I will be there in March. I help do training with the Healthcare Trust mediation program, as I mentioned to you. Yeah. I work with the Camden Mediation Center. Richard Hill is a longtime transformative mediation expert and works there at that center. So there's connections in England and in Europe as well. So I appreciate you asking.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'll post that link on the bottom so people can click on it.
That would be great.
Go find out more about it.
Thank you for your questions. They were great. Good conversation.
Joe, I really appreciate it. And if you're ever in London and at a loose end, let me know. And if I'm over in your neck of the woods, I'll be I'll dinner on me, definitely.
Absolutely. No, let me know if you're in Philadelphia.
Definitely. All right, Joe. All the very best. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.